After the horrifying crash of Robert Wickens a year prior, fans, drivers, and officials were frankly nervous when the IndyCar Series returned to Pocono Raceway on Sunday, August 18th, 2019. People were mentally preparing for the possibility of this year's race being even more destructive than last, and many fans, myself included, just hoped for a safe race. There are also some rumblings of IndyCar and Pocono parting ways after 2019, news that some fans welcomed and others hated. But regardless of what side you're on, we all hope for a great day of safe racing action from the 2019 ABC Supply 500. However, well transpired that fateful summer day would prove to be the final nail in the coffin for a very historic race.
Huge crash, Hunter-Reay, Sato, oh no, and Rossi is in it. Up in the fence is Rosenquist.
Car upside down, Sato's car. 5 cars taken out of this 500-miler on the opening lap. It's lightning,
And it's going to be rainfall shortly thereafter.
it's been one of those days.
We were saying in the grandstands that this almost certainly has nailed the coffin shut of potential IndyCar at Pocono.
I'd be lying if I said the issues surrounding IndyCar's second stint at Pocono were hard to pinpoint and explain. Really, the issues surrounding just the 2019 Pocono 500 are easy to spot to the point where they seem highlighted in fluorescent green paint. At 9:30 a.m. on the dot on August 17, 2019, Practice 1 would get underway for the 2019 ABC Supply 500. The session was pretty quiet, considering it was cancelled. The reason why this came about was due to bad weather around the area, preventing the medical helicopter from taking off. Now, this is bad enough on most weekends, but it was even worse this weekend. See, minus a morning warm-up the next day, this was scheduled to be the only practice session. Now, this is a very important note. If you give the drivers basically no practice, regardless of what series it is, the race is prone to generate more chaos. With less practice, the drivers are far less comfortable with their race cars, the track, and their competitors. The cancellation of the lone practice session really doomed this race before it even started. So at this point you may be wondering about qualifying, but much like the practice session earlier that day, it too was cancelled. The starting grid for the 2019 ABC Supply 500 would be set by championship standings, and looked exactly like this. In row 11, we have the Carlin duo of Charlie Kimball and Connor Daly. In 2019, Daly was competing part-time across 3 different teams: Andretti Autosport, Schmidt-Peterson, and of course Carlin. He primarily drove the Carlin this year, driving the number 59 Gallagher car on the ovals. Max Chilton was a regular driver of that car, but decided in 2019 to skip out in the non-Indy 500 ovals. If you want to hear his career story, you can click the video appearing on the top right. Charlie Kimball was also a part-time driver this year, albeit not sharing driving duties with anyone. They complete your 11th row. In row 10, we have the Brazilian AJ Foyt duo of veteran Tony Kanaan and sophomore IndyCar driver Matheus Leist. Both have had a pretty rough year so far, and are looking to turn their seasons around in the closing stages. In row 9, there's another sophomore veteran teammate duo of Zach Veach and Marco Andretti. Veach and Andretti both had a pretty good race here last year, and are looking for another good result. Row number 8 sees Oval Master Ed Carpenter and sentimental rookie Marcus Ericsson. The former F1 driver is competing for the very first time in Pocono, and although not sharing a color scheme or a number with his predecessor, his number 7 Schmidt-Peterson entry is a remnant of Robert Wickens' team from 1 year prior. Although not having as impressive a rookie year as a Canadian, Ericsson had already scored a podium in 2019 and is looking for a good result in Pocono. In row 7, there's some very contrasting rookies: 19-year-old Colin Herta and 22-year-old Santino Ferrucci. Although not separated far by age, they do heavily contrast in their routes to get here. After nearly winning the Indy Lights Championship the year prior, Colin began his first full-time season wearing only his 3rd career IndyCar start at the only ever IndyCar race at Circuit of the Americas. Herta became the youngest ever IndyCar winner at the age of just 18. Ferrucci, meanwhile, had come from Europe. In 2018, Ferrucci was a test and reserve driver for Haas F1, and was also a driver for the Trident team in Formula 2. He was partnered up with Indian Arjun Maini. The two of them were unhappy with the internal workings of the team and their severe lack of performance. The year was already going terrible, but things would get even worse in Silverstone. After a skirmish with Maini on track, Ferrucci would, from the looks of it, intentionally run into his teammate on the cooldown lap. Now this is bad enough, but after that, while still on track, Santino allegedly took his gloves off and used his cell phone while driving a 620 horsepower Formula 2 car. After that, he was summoned to a meeting with the FIA stewards after the race, a meeting that Ferrucci wouldn't attend, citing a nondescript personal family matter that he had to attend to as a reason for his absence. After all of that, Ferrucci was handed a 2-round, 4-race suspension from Formula 2. However, he would never serve that suspension as he was fired by the team in the hours after the Silverstone incident, and was later dropped by the Haas team as their test and reserve driver. The stuff that was seen by fans and journalists was bad enough. However, there might have been even worse stuff going on in the background. There were alleged cases of racial abuse against Argentini at the hands of Santino and his father, Michael Ferrucci. Now, for legal reasons, I'm not saying these allegations are true, nor would I suggest that Santino Ferrucci or any members of the Ferrucci family would conduct themselves in a similar fashion in the years preceding, during, or succeeding his time in Formula 2. However, what I will say is that the entire Silverstone situation created a fair amount of baggage that he had to carry with him as he was blackballed from racing in Europe, and switched his attention to IndyCar at the end of 2018, merging into 2019. Although his career had been through a big reset, Ferrucci has impressed in his rookie year so far, and joins Colin Herta on row 7. On row 6, we have Ed Carpenter racing Spencer Pigot, competing in his second full-time season, and 4-time Champ Car champion Sebastian Bourdais starting alongside. Breaking into the top 10 with row 5, we see the mayor of Hinchtown, James Hinchcliffe, who's looking to win his first race of the year and do so at the same track that nearly took his best friend's life a year prior. And alongside him, we have Swedish rookie for Chip Ganassi Racing, Felix Rosenqvist. Row 4 consists of the Rahal-Lerman-Lanigan duo of Takuma Sato and Graham Rahal. On row 3, we find our first former Pocono winners, with 2015 winner Ryan Hunter-Reay alongside 2016 and 17 winner Will Power. Power started his career hating ovals, but as the years have gone by, he's become a force to be reckoned with on them, and looks to get his third Pocono win. On row 2, we find your reigning series champion Scott Dixon, and your 2019 Indy 500 winner Simon Pagenaud. And finally on the front row sits your reigning Pocono 500 winner Alexander Rossi, and on the poles your championship leader Joseph Newgarden. So there it is, the starting grid for the 2019 Pocono 500. Only 22 drivers strong, but an interesting field nevertheless. A shoehorn practice session towards the end of Saturday was the only on-track action before the start of the race. The teams had 2 hours of practice, and it was Tony Kanaan who set the pace. Throughout the weekend, the biggest storyline was fear. The Wickens crash the year prior was still fresh in everyone's minds, from fans to drivers, broadcasters, journalists, and everyone in between. But despite fear being in the spotlight, there are other storylines of note that weekend. A pretty big storyline came as McLaren announced that they would join forces with Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports starting in the 2020 season, putting 2 McLarens on track and rebranding the team to Aero McLaren SP. However, the biggest of these storylines was the ongoing championship fight and the swing of momentum. Joseph Newgarden, while still in the championship lead, took a bit of an ego hit in mid-Ohio, after a clumsy last lap move sent him spinning into the gravel trap. On top of that, Joseph's main championship rival of Alex Rossi was going to a track he had won at the year prior in dominant fashion. The gap was now down to 16 points, and the stage was set for an interesting championship fight whose next chapter was set to be written that hot August afternoon. But the expectations that everyone had were soon going to be thrown out the window.
On a warm Pennsylvania summer afternoon, NBC Sports welcomes you to the NTT IndyCar Series, racing from Pocono. Today's telecast is presented by Honda. It is race 14 of the 17-race 2019 season. And what has been a captivating year, to say the least, that brings us to this. 4 races to go and 4 famed drivers in the hunt to claim this championship. Joseph Newgarden leads Alexander Rossi by just 16 points as it's time to go trackside for the command.
Race fans, it's time for those most famous words in motorsports. Here to give the command from Rahway, New Jersey, please welcome ABC Supply Managing Partner, Donnie Portillo.
Drivers, start your engines.
An unenthusiastic command would soon be the least of people's concerns. As the cars hit the track, the adrenaline kicked in, and all hope for a clean start. In formation, the 22 drivers would come around the third corner, and when the green flag came out, the chain of dominoes began to fall. The green flag flew and the field scurried about. Drivers were going 5 wide farther behind, while up towards the front, Alex Rossi had a really bad start while Pagenaud had a great one. While Pagenaud took the lead from teammate Newgarden with a clean move on the inside of turn 1, Rossi was struggling, exiting turn 1 in 5th. Behind him was teammate Ryan Hunter-Reay and Takuma Sato approaching very quickly. The 3 drivers were converging on each other as they went down the backstretch, and then disaster struck.
Hunter-Reay is to the inside. Huge crash. Hunter-Reay, Sato. Oh no, and Rossi is in it.
A lot of cars.
Up
Rossi
in the
in it.
fence is Rosenquist.
This is disastrous for Rossi in the championship. His teammate was involved like he was last year.
Crash. Takuma Sato is upside down and that car is on fire. This is Felix Rosenquist.
Although certainly not as horrific as the crash the year prior, a second multi-car accident in as many years, sending one driver into the fence and the other upside down, was a disaster. As soon as those cars came to a stop, it's fair to say that this race's future was sealed. Fans were almost immediately upset, and can you blame them? Emotions were strong. Another crash had taken place, more cars were destroyed, and yet another rookie was sent into the catch fence. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. When the crash took place, I was on my way home from a test day with my kart, and when I heard the news, my mind immediately went back to the crash the year prior. Wickens in 2018 was my favorite driver, and back in 2019 my favorite driver was Rosenquist. Even I, as a PA IndyCar fan, whose only hope of seeing an IndyCar race at that point was Pocono remaining on the schedule, felt as if this was too much. None of the drivers were injured, but it was still a very scary close call. 4 laps into the race, the red flag would come out for track cleanup. During the red, the wrecked cars of James Hinchcliffe and Alex Rossi were brought back to the teams, who started trying to repair them. Unfortunately for them, working on their cars during the red flag would net them a 10-lap penalty, taking them hopelessly out of contention. As the red flag was withdrawn, there were issues for Will Power, who had to pit for 4 tires during the yellow after picking up a puncture driving through debris. As a result, he would be relegated farther down the field. After a waved-off first attempt at a restart, the race would get back underway on lap 9, with Pagenaud in the lead. Scott Dixon, meanwhile, was quite aggressive, getting by Joseph Newgarden pretty quickly. As the laps buzzed by, and Pagenaud and Dixon were pulling away, the viewer's attention has shifted towards the pit stops. But around the lap 25 mark, there were 2 other things of note. Firstly was how Will Power was now knocking on the doors of the top 10, and secondly was how slow the AJ Foyt cars were. On lap 30, the pit stops began, with Zach Veach in the Gamebridge car the first to pull in. 8 laps later, it was Pagenaud pulling in from the lead, giving the lead to Dixon before he pit at the end of the lap. By lap 40, the only driver left to pit was Will Power, who finally came in that lap. Almost simultaneous to Power pulling in was Spencer Pigot crashing in turn 1. It was a very lucky break for Power, who is now back in contention. As for Pigot, he hit a bump in turn 1 and suffered some kind of failure that sent him into the wall, although no one ever said what specifically broke on his car. Now back in the fight, Will Power was really racy on the lap 47 restart, going side by side with Pagenaud, taking the lead a lap later, before losing it again shortly thereafter. By lap 70, the approaching wave of rain became too much to ignore, so with this came a bout of field-wide impatience. Will Power would grab the lead, and only 2 laps later, the pit stop started. Unfortunately for Power, the same break Will had on the first round of pit stops wouldn't befall him on round 2. Before Will could pit, another yellow flag would come out after Colin Herta crashed in turn 2, forcing Power to pit under the yellow flag and sending him farther down the top 10. For the lap 82 restart, the front 3 were Scott Dixon, Santino Ferrucci, and Simon Pagenaud. Besides some aggressive moves from Power to make it up to 4th, this stint of the race was pretty boring, and outside of safety concerns, this point was probably the biggest issue. As we passed the halfway mark, the 3rd round of pit stops began, and unlike the previous 2, there wasn't an incident during it. Afterward, the order remained frustratingly similar to before, with the top 5 comprising of Dixon, Ferrucci, Pagenaud, Power, and Ed Carpenter. After the pit stops, the race threw us a curveball. After the commercial break before lap 110, the video of this race on the official IndyCar YouTube channel skipped back to lap 95. When that happened, I thought this race had turned into my version of Groundhog Day, but as it turns out, that wasn't the case. Will Power was in the lead around lap 110, and when he finally came into the pits and back out, he was still in the lead. On lap 124, the coverage on NBC cut away to another commercial, and what we didn't know is that we had just seen the last green flag laps of an IndyCar race at Pocono. As the coverage came back, the yellow flag came out as well. The storm wasn't at the track just yet, but the lightning was. With the race past the halfway mark, the outcome seemed pretty much inevitable. After a very short red flag, the race was declared official. Will Power would score his third win at Pocono, and his first of the 2019 season. Scott Dixon would finish second, and Simon Pagenaud would come home in third. That night after the race, the future of the event seemed to have been sniffed out by many. Coming into this race, things were a bit up in the air, but after a massive lap 1 crash, a blasé race, and a red flag that cut the race short due to weather, it was a storm that Pocono couldn't realistically recover from. Simply put, it was the final nail in the coffin. Just 2 weeks later, the news was made official. After a return of just 7 years, the Pocono 500 was done. Taking its place on the schedule was a return to Richmond Raceway in Virginia, a race that was also cancelled less than a year later, having never actually hosted a race. Today marks a 4-year anniversary of this race happening, and looking back, it's just sad to me. This mighty event, at one point one of the biggest in the IndyCar schedule, just cut down with very few people mourning its loss. Even today, I'm conflicted. The closest race to me on the IndyCar schedule is Toronto, so as both a big IndyCar fan and the IndyCar history guy who appreciates the history of this event, you think I'd want the race to come back. In reality, a lot needs to change before I could say it's worth a shot again. The drivers need more practice time, the safer barriers need to be twice as tall as they are now, and the track needs a repave. Currently, the track is way too bumpy for IndyCars to run there, so unless these changes are made, my best shot watching an IndyCar race in person is about 10 hours away, either in Toronto, Canada or at Mid-Ohio. That to me is not only a pain in the ass, it shouldn't even be possible. It's not like I live in some Beaufunk middle of nowhere town either. I'm from Philadelphia, the biggest city in a state that has a giant population of IndyCar fans. Hell, there's a reason why at one point Pocono was called the Indy of the East. Hell, even today, Pennsylvania is one of the biggest markets for IndyCar, not just on the television side of things, but in terms of on-track attendance as well. There should be a race in the Northeast, or even the Mid-Atlantic for that matter. Real quick, let's just go through the places that IndyCar could realistically run at. Let's look at Baltimore for instance, because they had an IndyCar race about a decade ago. Hell, I walked around downtown where the first turn was down there a few weeks ago. And don't tell me the crime is why we shouldn't go. I walked around downtown Baltimore a lot when I was down there, and I felt way more safe even by myself carrying 2 bags of luggage to Penn Station than I've ever felt walking through Center City, Philadelphia. As long as you don't go into the ghetto, Baltimore's a fantastic city with very charming qualities and a fantastic Center City ambiance. And that's big coming from a guy who doesn't like living in the city. We could probably still race in Baltimore if we wanted to, or if we don't want to race on a street circuit, let's talk about New Jersey Motorsports Park. ARCA has raced there, the Road to Indy has raced there, and Formula Regional Americas and USF4 still do. Or if we want to race on an oval, here's a few in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic that we could easily run at. We've run New Hampshire in the past, why not return? Maybe we could go to North Wilkesboro after the inevitable repave, or we could just keep it simple and race in Richmond like we were meant to do in 2020. Pocono could still work, but needs a lot of fixing. One day, I hope it'll happen, but part of me doubts it ever will. The Pocono 500 was at one point a marquee event on the IndyCar schedule, but thanks to a hellish series of events, I doubt the race will ever have the luster that it once did, and for all we know, it may never return to the IndyCar calendar. It's a sad and unjust fate, and it was a story that was really epitomized on August 18th, 2019, when the Tricky Triangle said a possibly permanent farewell to the top flight of American open wheel racing. Thank you all for watching, and have a great afternoon. Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing very well. These are some last minute thoughts from myself, Ron Mullins, before this video fades out and YouTube recommends whatever it wants you to watch after this video. This was definitely a very long one. I believe it's one of, if not the longest videos I've ever posted on this channel. The script was about 3,100 words, which is about 800 words longer than any other script I've used in a video so far. So yeah, it's fair to say that this video was definitely a long haul, and if you've made this far into the video, thank you very, very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. released. This video was meant to be released back in 2022, but due to a lot of reasons surrounding me racing at the time and also preparing for senior year of high school starting a few weeks after that video was meant to be released, I had to push it back to this year, but thankfully now in my first summer as a free man out of school, I was able to get this video out for y'all this year, and I hope you enjoyed it very much. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this video, regardless of where you're watching it from. Thank you so very much for watching this video, and have a great afternoon.